This is to tell you how we feed some results of a scientific project into an R&D strategy with a private partner. 2 years ago, there was almost an accident in the funding scheme at the Gates Foundation because they decided to invest a lot of money into a small grant called a learning grant. That's a 2-year grant, which we called STARS, Spurring a Transformation for Agriculture Through Remote Sensing. And it's a grant that has been active in 3 regions, so East Africa, West Africa, and South Asia. South Asia, mostly Bangladesh. There's a whole range of partners who've been involved in this, and I will not give all the detail right now. But what I'm going to tell you to look at is this field right here. So this is the outline of about a 1 hectare field, smallholder field, in the cotton belt in Mali. And this is imagery that tells you the level of detail that satellites are today able to provide on an operational basis. So what you're going to see right now is a sequence of images over the course of a single growing season, and I want you to pay close attention to what you see inside that field. So, but first of all, oh yeah, I forgot 2 things. That's the rationale, of course, for this work. First of all, in Africa, we use 12 kgs of fertilizer per hectare on the average. In Asia, it's 100. So we have a huge gap to bridge before we can attempt to even achieve the kinds of yields that Asia is achieving. We only use 20% of arable land in Africa. It's very different from what has happened in Asia. We're farther behind in terms of the development curve. There's an exponential growth in demand for agricultural produce because we are now in the middle of the demographic window transition, where population is exploding in urban centers, and cities like Kano, which is today more populous than Hyderabad, are going to become enormous cities in the future. As you know, Lagos is already 25 million and on the track to becoming the biggest city in the world for 40 million people. One city. So those are huge markets that are going to fundamentally change the way agricultural production is happening in Africa. There will not be subsistence agriculture in Africa in 30 years down the road, or it's going to be very, very marginal. So that's a very big growth opportunity that has to be seized, keeping in mind that smallholder systems are extremely heterogeneous in Africa, much more so than they are in Asia right now. So let's look at those images now and how they change over the course of the season. So that's a single growing season. And you see fields greening up, actually redding up. That's just a false color composite. And you see what's happening on that field, where you can literally monitor the agronomic operations in the middle of the field. And you could see the farmer harvesting part of his field because he was maybe facing some kind of labor constraint. So you could actually put a date tag on the date when the field was actually harvested. Likewise, you could put a date tag on the date when the field was actually plowed or prepared for a number of agronomic practices. So this was yesterday in 2014. That's 50 centimeter imagery in terms of pixel size, and that's 4 to 8 spectral bands for 25 cents of a dollar per hectare is the actual cost of the imagery. What's going to happen with this is that we're able to monitor fertility management levels on farm, and that's something we've done, and I'm going to show you a few results later on. What's going to happen tomorrow, actually today Digital Globe is releasing imagery that's 30 centimeter in pixel size over 29 spectral bands for a cost of 23 cents per hectare. That's the actual nominal retail cost if you buy it at the nominal retail price, and you can get discounts if you buy volumes. What's going to happen tomorrow, and tomorrow that's maybe 10 years down the road, is 20 centimeter, maybe smaller pixel size from commercial civil satellite imagery with maybe 50 spectral bands. And right now Daniel is working with Space Bell and the private sector in Vietnam to develop hyperspectral sensors of that new generation. So you can imagine that we will live in a world very soon, even today, which is not constrained by data scarcity like it was for a long time, and like it was defining all these scientific paradigms that we were working with. So as I said, there has never been so much data, and actually new data, not like clones of data like you see in a lot of the climate scientists, for example, but these are actually observations that can be sourced from imagery, and these are flight envelopes for drones that we launched in this project. And from the ground, these are the fertility treatments, 15 by 15 meter plots inside a typical farmer plot. Each of them is monitored with quadrats of 2 by 2 meters. Each quadrat is monitored with 5 plants, for which we have ground people measuring chlorophyll content or LAI, light interception, etc. So there really is no limitation in technology today in providing very granular data down to the plant level. So this is the kind of result that you get, and this is what remote sensing can do for you today. If you look at this graph and remember the time series that we saw earlier, over the course of a season from June to October, and for 5 crops, sorghum, peanut, millet, maize, cotton, which are dominant in this specific cropping system, you can see how a vegetation index like NDVI, which is related to the greenness of your biomass on the field, evolves over the course of a season. And what you see is that the fertilization effect as you go from low to high fertilization on peanut right here is about 0.1 in terms of the range of variation in your NDVI. But if you look across all the fields of a given sample of farmers who are cultivating peanut, you see that now the variation is 0.2. And if you look at the 5 types of crops across the whole cropping system, the variation in the NDVI is 0.3. What this means is that if your objective is to monitor fertilization levels at a landscape level, they are completely dwarfed by other effects of management, like the crop type, themselves dwarfed by other aspects of management, typically sowing dates and other agronomic practices. So it is not until you have been able to resolve these effects that you will be able to quantify on a landscape scale the effects of fertilization on your crop performance. And likewise, at the intra-field level, this is to show you the potential of imagery for monitoring, for example, light interception and its relationship with yield. You see, for example, that we have very good correlations for millet and sorghum, and this is because this UAV campaign was launched in August, which in West Africa corresponds to that time, August, September, when you have peak biomass and really the full blooming of the crop. Contrastingly for maize, which is already senescent at that time of the year, the relationships are much less good. So there's an enormous potential now in imagery to provide metrics about the performance of the crop. However, as I said, unless you're able to understand what's really going on the ground, especially in terms of the management practice, then you will not be able to resolve problems of equifinality, because you will not be able to attribute a particular crop response to either an environmental signal like rainfall or to a particular management practice or a particular genotype, for example. And in this way, what we learned in this project was that using very high resolution imagery, very minute with very fine grain, looks very attractive, but in fact is exactly as using mechanistic crop models, where you have a lot of requirements for initial conditions, for parameters, but you have very little data to actually parameterize them properly. So many combinations of different initial conditions and parameters can end up into the same result, which is why the same way we need good data to use complex models, the same way we need good information about management practices, in particular, to interpret very high resolution imagery. So now how do you procure that data? And today, we could say, we could be a bit megalomaniac and say, that's what the remote sensing folks say all the time. Yeah, of course, we can recognize crops from remote sensing and things like that. But it's actually far more complex when you see the reality of the heterogeneity of the system. And probably it's much more efficient and effective to capture the variability in management, not so much from the imagery itself, but from mobile networks. Could be sensor networks that are automated, like soil moisture sensors. It could be from extension agents who are using smartphones of the kind that Manobi uses to just carry the platform for data collection. So one example here is that once you stratify your landscape into high position, mid slope, and lowland, then you will see that the signal is going to vary in different ways. For example, lowland fields are typically much older fields that have been cleared of many trees over several decades, and they have a much more homogeneous behavior in terms of the intra-field variability in your vegetation condition. This is the variation in your vegetation condition inside each field. They also have a stronger response typically because they have better soils. They're in the lowlands. But if you go in the mid-slopes or even more on the plateaus, you will see that in the mid-slopes, for example, you peak at 0.4 NDVI just because you have a lot of runoff, shallower soils, and you have somewhat less variability inside the field, also because you have lower tree density, because those soil types cannot carry as high a tree content inside each field. And when you go to the topsoils on the plateaus, those are still fairly clayey soils, but with many more trees. Look at the tree density here compared to this. So you have a higher vegetation growth and higher production of biomass, but more heterogeneity inside each field. So it's not until you've been able to segregate the population of environments that you're dealing with on a landscape scale that you will be able to actually ascertain whether a crop response is attributable, for example, to a particular fertility management level. So how can we use data more effectively for smallholder farming? In fact, that question comes from this meeting I think Dakshna and I attended in AgMIP last week or so, where they asked us, well, can you advise on how to most effectively use remote sensing in smallholder and commercial farming? And I raised the end because I thought, what leads you to think that smallholders cannot do commercial farming? We live in an era where technology is not limiting to do that. So Daniel was already talking about the need to integrate both the imagery and the ground level information, which is also captured in the fact that if you want to understand this, and I'm going to skip this one, you need to do that. If you want to understand yield gaps, relative yield gaps in your landscape, you have to take into account representation of the environmental effect, the management effect, which means that you should, in theory, have to stratify your landscape into low, intermediate, high categories for farm endowment profiles and management, for example. Likewise, for example, for soils. And if using remote sensing and field data, you're able to affect that stratification, then you will be able to interpret maybe the higher quartile in the distribution of vegetation indices as your exploitable or attainable yield in that specific condition. And then you will be able to interpret what is the yield gap attributable to. Is it soil type? Is it poor management? Is it a combination of the two? So being able to produce this kind of stratification in different systems is likely to help you understand what is your yield gap attributable to. And what we think, working with Manobi, is that by combining remote sensing and mobile technology, we have the, I would say, the technological base to answer that kind of question at scale. And that's exactly what we want to do right now. So coming back to stars, this is all good. You could say, okay, we have the solution, we stratify both in terms of management and environment, and then we'll be able to solve all the problems linked to, for example, optimized fertilizer management. But is this sustainable? We've only solved, in theory, a practical, say, agronomic problem. Have we solved it from a business perspective? In Isabella, which is the West Africa component of STARS, we were thinking that the entry point for us was an issue of land tenure, because we said since people don't own land, they cannot invest in it. That's a very common thought in sustainable land management, etc. And then we said, since we're not able to recognize crops, then we cannot link them into the value chain, because we don't know what is going to be the production for a particular crop, what is the acreage, the kind of problems that Daniel was mentioning. But if you think of it, it's a very top-down approach. The farmer doesn't need to know where the crop is. He knows it already, right? And the farmer also knows that the law anyway doesn't allow him to own land in many areas, rural areas of Africa. So for us, scientifically, it looks a perfectly reasonable hypothesis, both of them. But in practical terms, it's useless. You don't need to tell a farmer where the crop is, and you don't need him to tell him, well, you should buy or sell your land, because they can't actually do it. So the value propositions that we had were too supply-driven, and they were too focused on the farmer, the smallholder farmer, as a direct client. We were assuming that they would buy this idea. Even though we have very good technology, high potential, we can discriminate a lot of things, in practice, it's not meeting a particular demand at the smallholder level. So, stemming from what Daniel presented earlier, you recognize his pyramid scheme. We know that in Mali, for example, farmers spend, I would say, on the average, in the cotton belt, $20 to $30 per season only for taxes on carts, number of donkeys, number of bikes, number of firearms that they own. So they can actually, and they do, pay taxes to the commune. And we were thinking, why can't we just have levy a tax of like 20 cents for them to help us buy imagery that would provide this kind of land tenure information system? This is in Nigeria, where we mapped almost 300,000 individual farmer plots over an area of less than 1,000 square kilometers. To tell you the average field size in Nigeria over there is about 0.2 hectares. This was also a flawed approach, because neither the law nor the volume of transactions of land can actually support the demand for this kind of service as a standalone, service for smallholders. So this is not a correct approach. The correct approach is to actually look where the demand lies, and the demand lies with the big players. And the big players are who? Daniel was mentioning OCP. OCP is the, I think, #2 world #1 phosphate fertilizer supplier, and they changed their strategy this year to expand into sub-Saharan Africa, 16 countries. So they need to know who their clients are going to be, but they don't know any of those smallholder farmers, so they're not able to penetrate smallholder markets and bring fertilizer at a lower cost to those people. So we have not really worked on that segment of the business model, whereas this is really where the potential lies. Because for OCP, paying $1 per hectare is not a problem at all. It's very easy for them to cover the entire cost of provision of the source data, covering a good part of the field data, and covering all the data processing costs that come with it. So that's really something that we didn't do right, and I learned it from Daniel. If you want to first develop a model that will take care of the research costs to produce scientific knowledge that can be used and turned into a service, then you have to first think about where the demand lies. And this is where the demand is. OCP was mentioning Swiss Re, the big insurance companies in the different countries, the banks, because the banks want to move out of the cities and they want to also serve the smallholder markets but they don't know who they are. They don't know how much land they own. They don't know what their assets are, their different capitals, how solvable is, so they can't estimate their insolvency risk. That's right. And so this is the kind of information that we need to take into account when we want to develop the financial base for these kinds of services. So a quick example before I wrap up. I won't go into the detail about what index insurance is. I guess most of you, if not all, know the detail. That's a technical opportunity that can be addressed in many ways. One of them is remote sensing imagery, as it provides you a spatialized situation of your season or your climatic signal in a given location. But what CCAF says is that it's not until you have integrated insurance into a broader strategy of agricultural development, aka policy, into better delivery channels, aka what the kind of things that Manobi is doing, into farmer feedback loops, so extension services that actually co-produce knowledge, and into good science backstopping, that you will be able to bring the service into a sustainable investment for smallholders. So one example that we have is this one. If you think of what I was mentioning in terms of the stratification of a given landscape, if you took a bad year, a poor year, a medium year, a good year, and you were able, using crop models, for example, and existing farmer practices that you document from these surveys, what is the attainable yield under current best farmer management practice? Then you can determine what should be an acceptable level of insured yield, and you will also monitor the actual yields. If you have that and you're able to decline it into the different climatic situations, then what you're effectively able to do is to decouple yield losses that are due to climate from yield losses that are due to poor practice. And if you're able to do that, the insurer is going to be very happy with you. And the farmer as well, because you're going to be able to bring products at a level of detail which matches the farm where the farmer is operating. So the way we work on this one, well, it's a little bit misaligned, but if you take the example of the maize value chain in Senegal, you could apply to others. Yearly, you need to know how many producers you have in a given cooperative. This is something you collect with mobile phones. Can help you estimate the market size for banks and for insurers. Then in May, which is about the time when they plant, you can monitor from imagery how many fields have actually been tilled. So who are the farmers who can actually say they are ready to plant and can therefore be eligible for receiving input credit. So it's not until the bank has received a green flag from Manobi that tells them this guy is ready to receive credit because we know he has sown his field. Then the bank will not release the input credit. And likewise, after sowing, you can monitor from this kind of imagery the planting density. How many plants have actually established, germinated successfully and established. So you could dimension the other inputs that are needed after that. And what it allows over the course of a season is for the banks to reduce cash outs because they can fragment input credit into different installments, the same way you would do it with, for example, a subcontractor in research. So you don't give all the money at the start of the season and incur a high risk of losing everything. You just give what is needed after you have the proof that the farmer has, I don't like the word compliance too much, but has actually complied with a specific contract he has subscribed to give him access to that particular loan. So I'm almost done, and I won't get into a lot of detail. Those slides will be available for you to know that we developed this R&D portfolio at Manobi based on the demand from those big players. So one of them is really OCP, and we have a strategic joint venture with them. Another one is the big reinsurance companies, and we also have a strategic joint venture with them. And there will be others coming up. For example, we are working with Digital Globe, which is the leading commercial imagery supplier today, to also get a preferential joint venture with them, giving us, for example, discounts on the imagery, which will reduce all the costs of production of that scientific knowledge. This is the way the R&D division that we're building in Manobi is structured. We have 4 clusters of activities: field data networks, image analytics, next-gen heuristics, and farm support services. What's important to note is that all this line of products here and all this one are funded by business units. So the money that actually allows these services to exist and these development, for example, in the development of new app specifications like optimal sowing date apps, comes from farmers and other stakeholders on the value chain who actually take a little part of the cost they pay, for example, to an aggregator for harvest collection, and this cost is redirected to the development of those services. For those that are a little higher end, we seek investments from OCP and Swiss Re and the industry, because those are longer term investments. This is another ambition that Manobi has. It's actually not an ambition anymore, it's a plan. We are developing a network of 5 geospatial data centers to actually serve as the interface between big data coming from remote sensing and big data coming from mobile networks on the ground. So in each of those data centers, this one is already, the funding is already available with OCP. This one we're raising the funds with ESA through a specific mechanism called ARTIS, destined to the private sector. And the other 3 will come in due course. But the objective is to develop this kind of architecture, at each of those sites, where you can have services that are developed on the competitive stage and that contain, for example, for each of the farmers, their ID card, their name, the farm, etc., information that they have, and the pre-competitive, where the information is anonymized and provided to partners like ICRISAT or Wageningen or whoever to, for example, calibrate models or improve models. Again, we are monitoring 15,000 farms the single first year. So that's a very massive amount of data which is coming up, where you have sowing dates, the different fertilizer application rates, etc., etc. These are the types of partners we're working with. It's already been mentioned. And that's the last slide to say that really, we live at a time where agriculture is going to be Uberized like many other segments of the economy. There will be a time not far away when individual farmers can connect to distant buyers and vice versa. The technology is not limiting today, so now is the time to start developing these kinds of innovations. And what this will actually permit, because the focus that we have in Manobi is really targeted at the smallholder segment, is to make sure that is an engine of growth which is equitable, because farmers have knowledge of what is going on through mobile technology and also the extension services working with them. So those were a few examples of how we capture some of the knowledge we've gained from the STARS project into a future service. Well, it's actually a service already existing. We embed it to accelerate the production of value for smallholders by connecting them to banks and insurance and input suppliers. Thank you. I know we're late, but do you have questions for Daniel or I?
Thank you very much, both of you, for the very interesting. I think it's it's similar to a number of ideas which were being worked out at the hackathon. And of course, I mean, like it's no more an idea, but actually a plan for you. And it's of course, I mean, it's nice. I mean, I like the word, like Uberization of agriculture. And
that's his idea.
Well, it's yeah. I mean, there are a lot of hurdles actually when we were presenting also to the venture capitalists, and the main thing is about there is a data problem. I mean, the technology is something different. There's a number of technologies which are to be there to be utilized to solve this problem. But now, how do we? I mean, you mentioned about subscription-based, self-subscription. I mean, how did you actually get the farmers? I mean, like you said, 15,000 farms have already subscribed. They are your clients already. In the last, or is it? You said you are monitoring 15,000 farms.
Yeah.
So these are your clients, basically, who joined this as a subscription on a.
Do you want to answer
subscription base, or?
We already have these clients. These are clients that we are already providing this, let's say, narrow kind of service. So we mentioned market information. So, and when we launched this, it was very easy to introduce it to these different cooperatives. So these 15,000 growers represent at least 13 agreements with different crops. So it's not something important. We already have in our basis almost 250 crops in different 10 countries. So it wasn't. I mean, the prospection was already done, so it was very simple for us to start. But every year, these farmers and all these farmers are looking for inputs. Every year they try to have a credit. So by working with the bank and the input supplier, we already have this domain in front of us. It's only our capacity this year, because we just launched the company in the hubs in the 7 countries I mentioned. So we selected 2 countries to start, but we already, we have the same result in Nigeria or in Ghana. If we start, because the demand is there, and OCP is the most important input supplier in the continent. So it wasn't so complicated for us to have these clients. They are already in our basis of users.
And what would be of course, if I understood right, it's basically through the banks, the credit suppliers, and
then that's the next steps. Absolutely.
Okay.
So the farmer used to ask banks credit every cropping season. So the platform is structured in a way that the bank will channel its clients through the bank. Okay. And the bank asks us to benchmark this client, to benchmark this project before deciding to give them the loan.
So I'm showing some examples before another question of the kind of work which is going on right now in data collection. These are some of the 15,000 plots that we're monitoring in Senegal and Ivory Coast. This one is in the cocoa value chain. So for each parcel which is monitored, the field agents collect metrics, pictures, the dimension of the plot, and a certain number of other information. I'm not sure I can show it. Yeah, they can show everything with related to the agronomic practice. What kind of fungicide are they using? What kind of pesticide? What kind of input? How much do they apply? What kind of agronomic practice do they have? Are they interested in advisory services? How much would they be willing to pay for each of those agronomic advisories? In this case, less than 1/5 of the value of the production. And this information is collected systematically through this method with a number of forms that are tailored to particular value chains. This one is the cocoa, which is fairly easy to manage because it's already very well organized towards the on the production side. So all the information that is collected at that level, which is, completely fully georeferenced, and also contains information at the higher level. This is the parent form that contains the information at the household level. You see here that we have 600 that are being collected. Proprietary information is available there, which can be left in a secure space, and but can be used once anonymized, for example, to parameterize trade-off models or cropping system models. Here you can see, for example, for a particular grower, the name, the ID card, and the different metrics that relate to his farm endowment. So of course this is private data, but if you aggregate it into farm types at community level, for example, then you have extremely valuable data that can be provided to research, for example, to improve any kind of prediction model. So in fact, these aspects are already embedded in the business model, which involves the farmer and, for example, the harvest, the aggregators that purchase the harvest from the farmer cooperatives. So the business side of it I don't master so well, but Daniel knows. It's extremely interesting for us as scientists, I think.
Just a question. So there was this pyramid at the start where you said, first is the service to assist, as part of which you do an inventory mapping and user identification, right? And then the next stage is, if they graduate, you start giving them business development services, right? So how does the farmer, so you help, by doing an inventory mapping and understanding the asset profile of the farmer, right? Does he qualify to then actually become a graduate and thereby access your business development services? Is that the way you appraise it?
Sorry, Daniel. I have a question related to that, so maybe we can answer both together. So, what is the conversion level from a farmer who is in the assist level to the graduate and to the the transformation level, and how do you do it?
Yeah. Okay. The frontier between both of them is not so clear. Let's say.
Distinct.
So
clear cut.
Clear cut. So that's clear also. But it is important to know that you have very, very poor farmers, isolated ones. They are not linked to any group, to any organizations. And for instance, presently, the same system, we are working with the World Food Program. They have a program named 4R. I don't know if you heard about this program. 4R. It's a program where they give them inputs against a certain activity in the village. Let's say to fix
labor for input.
Yeah, labor for input. It's a program based on labor for inputs. So they give them few things, whether it's inputs, whether it's instruments. They are very poor, right? And they just realize that when they give them the input, they don't have the basic information they need to run properly their crop. For instance, sowing date. So we work with the World Food Program at the bottom of the pyramid with this kind of clients program or any other player which is involved in this area. We work with it in order to provide services to farmers who will be able at one moment to say, okay, I decided to pay myself for this service. Okay? So he can decide it alone, or he can come through his grower organizations. Okay? So this is a different category I mentioned. Can you come back to your the business model, the business model that you put into your presentation?
Which one?
The one with the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
This one, yes. Okay. At that level, we cannot work alone. This is not possible for us to address directly. We don't know where they are necessarily. We can see an area, but we don't have, as a private company, it's very difficult for us to go alone and target these very vulnerable farmers. This is where these partnerships with organizations like you or even World Food Program is very useful to bring these people into the system. Okay? So at least what we will do, if I have the code, you will see the same thing in terms of growing organization that the one Sibiry showed you for the cocoa growers. Even for these small-scale farmers, we will register them the same way. And we will use the platform to give a baseline of information which will feed a baseline, both to us but also to the World Food Program, so that they can really measure what is the impact of their program at the end of the growing season. If we have sufficient information and we can help these farmers to be part of to set up his own grower organization or to be part of a program for the next year, then it goes to the other level, which is called the graduate one, where he's already prepared to pay for a service through a loan or through a direct payment. But basically, the loan is the most efficient way to put into the loan. So this is a stratification that helps us really to know exactly which kind of service we provide to who. We don't dream about the fact that everyone can't have access to a loan today. That's true. But many people who can access the loan doesn't have the proper information, doesn't bring the proper data, doesn't have the proper story that makes the bank comfortable to do that. So that's the difference.
One more question.
Yes.
So, in your presentation, you kind of spoke about the work that you're doing related to, which is, access to credit, insurance, and input services. What about the other value chain, in terms of market access, or even transport logistics?
Yeah,
what kind of work is going on in Manawi?
The logistic is part of the two pillars that I mentioned. The one on the distribution of the inputs, the distribution network of inputs, and on the transaction with the buyers, right? So within the farmer or the crop balance sheet, the logistics is included. Okay, so when we go present a credit sheet for the cost to the banks, you have all these costs already charged. And we are one of our responsibility also is to provide solution that will help optimize this logistics. So it is included. We have a market information system from the beginning of Manawi. We set up the first service we set up is a market information system. And as I say, it is provided for free into the system. At the beginning, generally what we want to push is what we call the contract farming systems. So prices are negotiated earlier in the growing season. For instance, we know that the cocoa will be sold by 1,000 francs CFA per kg by the grower. So we have some countries we have some regulation regarding the price, so it's easy. Not some countries we don't have, but we always try to give to secure the best price to the market regarding what the market is offering. Other questions? Yes? Last one. Not last, but
no. Yeah. I understand. Of course. The huge transaction costs involved in dealing with the large set of smallholder farmers. It's not possible for a business to involve. And is linking with the credit or insurance service providers the only way to you envisage to reach the smallholder farmers, or is there any other? Because we, in India, for example, you have a collateral-based lending. If you have the documents, titles to the land, you are given a credit, otherwise no. So, and the banks, that way somehow, and the cooperatives also similar, we have, not so, very few successful. So in this situation, we are also trying to deal with, how do we reach out to the smallholder farmers and get them to subscribe. We know that self-subscription is the only way. So what would be the, that's why my question was, how did you actually convince the farmers or get a buy-in from the farmers to subscribe to the services that you provide? What are those minimum entry-level services which with which we can get the subscription of the farmers. I mean, because, you know, to provide any context-specific, I mean, there are a lot of generic services which are available, provided by different agencies, but, you know, the farmers are really looking for these context-specific services, like, and that requires data. And there are a lot of questions, of course, and maybe I'll go through that. Like who gives the data, and of course, if you're crowdsourcing, how do you get the farmers? What are the farmers' incentives to actually give you data, or the other extension agents or private? I don't know if they're private or publicly funded extension services. So it's of course, it's a very interesting thing, and would like to know more about how this is done.
Trying to respond to this question is everything in our strategy today is that it is to link everything to the grid, to pack the service, all the services that I mentioned, into the grid, so that when the farmer is agreed to get the credit, you receive all the different services, including the extension services, including those in which we can be involved, including the market information ones. Everything is insurance, everything is packed with the credit. We set up a proper balance sheet, and the way to convince the grower is very simple. First of all, the cost of production. It has to be optimized, and we can demonstrate to the farmers that compared to the regular, the actual cost of production that he knows, we can really reduce the cost of production by mutualizing the logistic, organizing the distribution channel at a large scale, providing solutions to the insurance companies so that they reduce their cost to the premium, etc. Giving information to the bank so that they can reduce the interest rate. So you bring, you look at the farmer, but also you bring added value services to the other player in the value chain. Now the production cost is reduced. One. But reducing your production cost doesn't mean that you will not give good inputs and good advice. So the goal is to increase the yield. So you bring that together, and generally when you increase the yield, the price also is lowering. But if you look at the balance sheet, the profit and loss, it is positive for the farmer. And you can really easily show him that, okay, compared to the actual system, this is your actual income, this is what you will reach if you follow up the proper practices, etc. This is where the insurance company comes. The insurance product is very important. Today, an insurance product generally covers the cost of production, the production cost. What we are developing today and what Sibiry shows you is a system which is covering the yield losses also. So you can go into a project where you take commitment with the farmer to reach a certain attainable yield or insurable yield, and if he's below this yield, after applying, and you can check that he's applying all these best practices, then the insurance comes and can cover the losses, So it's an ecosystem. You are not looking at as a market information, or I just want to have an input and I will. This is where it is very important for us to bring into the grid. And the core material, what is it? It's what I mentioned to you. It is a guarantee fund that we are setting up. Okay, this one is very important. We start this year with 14,000 growers that need this guarantee fund. We bring as a guarantee the inputs. We say to the bank that we are ready to be paid for the inputs 4 months after sowing, which means after the commercialization of the products. So, but if we want to extend it, we cannot proceed like this, and this is where the guarantee fund is going. What will be the story? As far as we will have farmers doing properly, with an acceptable ratio of performance for the banks, then the appreciation of the risk by the banks will be lower. That means that for some level of amount of guarantee, from guarantee, you can cover a larger number of farmers. This is the goal. Today, a bank asks almost 120% of guarantee of collateral to find a farmer. Just dream, we bring it to 30%, which is something. If he has a good contract, if he's properly insured, if he has a good support, that's something which can be possible. So this is this traction that we are busy to create. It requires a lot of data, not only data from the ground, and also this data has to be cleared. Explaining to you, we have a team in charge to clear every single data which is going into this platform. But also in terms of content, knowledge. Because as far as we have this data, it is important to be capable to analyze this data, to generate new services, to optimize this data. The cost of management of one farmer today should not be the same in 10 years. The cost of management of one farmer could not be the same if you are managing 40,000 farmers. Is not the same as managing 50 million of farmers. So we will need to constantly innovate, bring new services, be up to date in order to address this market. And every year we have to find where we can save costs, whether it is on the logistic, whether it is on the bank rates, whether it is on the I don't know, on the packaging, whether it is on the insurance. It's a business. Basically, it is a business, and every business is going the same. So finally, what we are doing is let's say, the bon sens, common sense. Common sense. You are using technology. Yes, it is smart, but basically, it is common sense.
Daniel, there's a question from Dr. Anthony Whitbread. He's the Director for Innovations in Trident Systems. He says, thanks for your seminar and vision you have presented. In terms of content delivery, the target, which is the farmer/input supplier, will determine the content required. Can resource-poor, often illiterate farmers in risky environments, disconnected from markets, make use of such services?
The killing question. I like it because, in fact, and I already responded to answering about this question. Did you imagine that 10 years before, that a farmer be able to buy a car, scratch it, take his mobile phone, type a dash, 123 dash, and reload airtime in his phone, and check if it works? The farmer is already educated to use a mobile phone. There is no doubt about this, and right now, I mean, at least in Africa, and I'm sure it's the same in India, farmers know how to use a mobile phone. So it is our goal right now to build on that content which can be used by these farmers. And this is what we are doing for years. And we never found that a farmer who was unable to use our service after 2 hours of training. So it's, I can show you some of our labs. They are iconized. They are presented in a way, they are even in Wolof, so which is a local language in Senegal, or in the native language of Senegal. So we are doing our best, and this is where the technology is important. I know that you are working on the IVR, also advice solution that you are providing. So I think the question of low literate is beyond us today. Most of the farmers are capable to use that. It's only to be sure that the content, and also, it's not the content really. The content, yes, but the added value that we bring him. How much attractivity is for him so that he can make the effort to use a service? This is the question. If we can help him to double his income, will it decide to not using it because he will call his son, he will call his brother and say, please, help me use this one because I want to double my income. This is the question. So thank you, Anthony. I like this question, but I think that look at the success of M-Pesa, look at the success of other service providers in Africa. All of them are showing that in Africa, and I think it's the same in India, people are very are using very easily this kind of technology. And this is the role of the service provider also to make it simple for the user. Yes?
Okay.
Speaking?
All right, I think that's a good hint. And we have to let people go. So we need to thank Daniel and Sibiry, It's pretty hard on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, okay.
Unfortunately, some people had to leave because the buses were leaving. And actually for Anthony, it's 9:30 at night for him at the moment. So it's good that he could connect. But, but I think there's a lot of interest. So, and it'll be good to see the future here and see how ICRISAT can continue to work in this space with Daniel and the team and of course now in Sibiry still very closely linked with that. Okay, so if we can thank them.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.